Welcome to the Forest Over Story podcast. This podcast explores forest stewardship in the Pacific Northwest, helping landowners and professionals gain new insights and information in the field of forest management. The Forest Over Story is a product of the Washington State University Extension Forestry Program and is supported by the Washington Department of Natural Resources and the Society of American Foresters. All right, well, welcome back to the Forest Over Story podcast. It is February, and theoretically speaking, there is a light at the end of the tunnel for winter. Spring's just around the corner, at least I hope so. I hope all of our listeners are having a great new year so far and staying active. For those of you that own or manage forest land, I hope your winter projects are going well, whether it's planting trees or pruning or even collecting maple sap and making syrup, whatever it is. I hope it's going well. We have a really great episode in store today, but first, introductions. As always, I'm your host, Patrick Schultz with WSU Extension, and I'm very fortunate to be joined by a co-host today. My colleague, Kevin Zobrist, is here to help out. Kevin, I'm sure a lot of people know who you are through your programming, but why don't you introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Thanks, Patrick. Well, I'm Kevin Zobrist. Like Patrick, I'm an extension forester, and I serve a big chunk of Northwest Washington, mostly the Puget Sound area counties, so Pierce, King, Snohomish, Skagit, and also up in the islands, Island County and San Juan County. And I've been with WSU for over 15 years now doing this, and I love it. Still think extension work is the best job in the world, and very thankful that you have invited me to help participate in this podcast.
Well, I'm pumped to have you on board. And actually, even before we logged on today, I was thinking, how long has Kevin been here? I probably shouldn't wager a guess because I didn't want to offend you if I said something like 25 years. I know it's not 25 years. I had thought it was 12, so I was pretty dang close. But I'm very excited to have you on, and especially given today's guest, this episode is a real sort of cougar fest, for lack of a better term. We are joined by a former WSU Extension forester, and I would dare to say even a little bit of a legend. At least that's how it felt when I came on the scene. I heard so much about this person and all the work they did in the Extension Forestry program. We have with us today Arno Bergstrom. Arno, how are you doing?
Great. It's great to be with you.
It's really great to have you on. We had been thinking about this for really a while, particularly having you and Don Hanley on. Don's another extension forester or former extension forester who unfortunately couldn't make it today. But just wanted to have you on to kind of talk legacy a little bit, the history of the extension forestry program. It's been around for a while, and I'm sure it's looked different over the years. So just I know Kevin and I kind of want to pick your brain on that, and some of the stuff you're doing now as well. But why don't we get started? Just tell us maybe a little about yourself and how you got into forestry and more particularly extension forestry.
Well, I can talk a lot, but I'll try to be brief. I grew up on a farm in southern Minnesota, and it was we were kind of row croppers. We had poultry and feeder hogs, and whenever my dad wanted to find out where I was, he always knew to check the grove or the woods. We had 8 acres of hardwoods mostly, and that's where I spent all my time. And we also spent a lot of time is out in the plains of along the Minnesota River, but and we traveled quite a bit in the summer when the crops were kind of left to grow on their own. And we'd be in the Rocky Mountains and visit national forests, national parks, and whatnot. And so, I guess I kind of developed kind of an interest in natural resources and at an early age. And of course, I think I was pretty naive about what forestry really was, but I didn't really care. And so anyhow, I chose not to take over the family farm and instead go to college and study forestry. And I graduated from the University of Minnesota in 1973, so 50 years ago. And at that time, there were a lot of veterans coming back from Vietnam. I did not serve. I and but the veterans that were coming out of the college there and everywhere for that matter, the jobs that were there, they got the veterans preference. I was mostly interested in going public sector, DNR, or national Forest Service or something like that. And I'll connect this back to my growing up. But as a farm boy, I was very involved in the 4-H program, and I'd gotten to know the extension forestry specialists at the University of Minnesota, and not realizing, that there are extension foresters, and that led me to, because at the time I came out or finished my degree to get a job in extension anywhere pretty much in the United States, you had to have a master's degree. So then I got a master's degree specifically with in pursuit of a position somewhere in the United States in extension forestry. And so I ended up getting the job as the Pierce County. Started out as a Pierce County extension forester, and I got that job in 1978. November of '78 is when I arrived. So I think I started December 1st. But anyhow, and that's where my career started.
Arno, what was your first impression of Washington and Washington forests coming from Minnesota?
Uh, I tell you what was my first impression of being here, having been trained in the Lake States? I know exactly, if it's still alive, I know where the only Douglas fir is on the St. Paul campus at the University of Minnesota. It was right near a dorm that I resided in my first year there. And it was pathetic by our standards here in terms of Western Washington, or even for that matter, Eastern Washington. But I was really kind of lost when you get right down to it. What was interesting about that is that I got to know, well, at the time, Soil Conservation Service forester who had studied, had spent a lot of time in the Dakotas, but he got his degree at WSU, and he was, because the Inland Empire is of course different than the Puget Sound Basin, so we kind of nurtured our we kind of uh, agreed that we would back each other up, and because we had to learn forestry all over again because it wasn't what we had learned when we were in college. So I was intimidated, I have to admit, but I was a pretty quick study on it, and it's as I like to tell people, it's my trees are my nerds. So I uh, I wanted I really wanted to be successful. The person I had replaced, who had been in the job for almost a career in Pierce County, um, had uh, he had kind of done more of a service forestry, like a DNR. He was helping people and writing forest stewardship or forest management plans for them. And when I was hired, they specifically um, didn't want me to do that. They wanted me to be an educator, and so um, and I had been doing some of that. So because my extension career actually started in northern Minnesota, I was believe it or not, a logging harvesting specialist, and I worked with doing educational programs for the logging industry in the Arrowhead region of northern Minnesota. Um, that was the job I had before I transferred out here to Washington.
So I'm kind of curious because, I mean, so many people that go into forestry um, see themselves, like you said, out in public lands. Uh, when I went into forestry, my thought was I'm gonna somehow end up living in a cabin out in the middle of nowhere, managing 5,000 acres and never seeing anyone again, which just sounded kind of nice. But it's funny as I kind of similar to you, as I kept going and I learned more about especially extension jobs and how much I enjoyed working with people and helping people learn about forest management, ultimately choosing teaching sort of over doing. What brought you to that? I mean, what was the experience that made you think you'd rather be educator than out there marking trees?
You know, well, when I got my bachelor's, I actually, my first job, non-extension job, was in the College of Forestry at the University of Minnesota. And so I was there during the outbreak of Dutch elm disease, and in the state office, in the college, the extension uh, forestry office. And then I also had a little bit of a background and did a lot of work with Christmas trees when I was a student. And I kind of became with some staffing changes, I kind of filled in as a Christmas tree specialist. So I was doing a lot of uh, extension delivery or educational programming. Um, and that's kind of where I cut my teeth in terms of the question you've asked. I was, responding to all the calls for Dutch elm disease and talking to citizens and, basically, that's where even though didn't have an extension appointment when I was a graduate assistant, I was doing the work, and I would even travel around the state a bit, doing uh, especially Christmas tree type stuff, and so I think that's where I developed that. Oh, this is something that I like to do. I can't say that I know how good at it I was, but I really I liked doing it. So at that point, so that's pretty much how that happened, and that just got transferred with me when I came out here. I just brought it with me.
Arno, you mentioned the kind of the beginning of the outbreak of Dutch elm disease. And now that we've just heard that emerald ash borer has been found in the Pacific Northwest, which means it's been here already for a few years. Do you have any wisdom, kind of lessons learned from Dutch elm disease that could be applied here in the Northwest as far as managing for emerald ash borer?
Well, what's my answer is I guess pretty simple, because when all the elm trees died, guess what they planted?
Ash.
They, they planted ash. Okay, because it's indigenous there. All right, and so now they have the ash borer. I have a sister that lives in a community with where it's decimated all their shade trees. She lives in a small town, a community, but all their ash trees are dead. And so the idea is, I think we don't know what the next disease or insect will be. We probably, but we need to think more about more diversity than simply planting a single species. That's, I guess, the insight that I have, because I mean, Dutch elm disease was devastating. I think they even did a survey. I remember um, Dave Barbander and others are talking about that. There wasn't a survey of the elm trees in the state of Washington, because there are some here, and some of them may have actually escaped Dutch elm disease because they're so far and few between, you know. But the more important thing is to have, I think, a more diverse, uh, a shade tree, if you want to call it that. I grew up with groves of elm trees, and it really changed the makeup of the hardwood forests.
Yeah, I emerald ash borer is a big scary thing, and it's just kind of another in what seems like a long list of forest health issues to worry about in Washington right now. I wonder, Arno, when you came here and started thinking about an extension forestry program, what what did you see were the biggest needs when you started? Was it forest health? Were we kind of dealing with the same stuff, or was it more kind of what you're doing in Minnesota, helping people log and harvest, or just something completely different? Just kind of curious if that has evolved in the last few decades.
Yeah. Yeah. In my mind, I guess it kind of, your question fits something I really wanted to share, and basically, I guess when I got to Pierce County, I got acquainted with, well, there was a DNR service forester who took me under his wing. Um, and then a soil conservationist with at the time was still called the SCS. And, and so they helped me kind of get my footing in terms of extension programming. And of course, the state specialist, Joe B. Haley, and he was replaced by Don Hanley. Um, and, so the focus was on, as we call them today, family forest landowners. That's a better phrase than what it was when it was called NIPF. But anyhow, the what I in those early, I'd say in the first 8 years or so, 8 to 10 years of my career, well, I also transitioned to become an area extension agent in both King and Pierce County. So my area got bigger, but we just what we were doing then, we were kind of doing it under the old what created the extension at the national extension forestry program, and that was to urge or through education somehow help private forest landowners become you know do a better job of managing their property, because just like nationwide, they own so much of the land. The private family forest landowners, they own a really high percentage of the land. And what we probably ended up doing is we had kind of a list of, and forest health, insects, diseases was like one of those topics. But we had this list of topics that we kind of rotated through, forest management, how to, select a logger. We did some stuff on, uh, how to transfer, the whole idea of estate planning before some of the other more sophisticated programs came along. And so we had this rotation of topics that we would do. Some of it would be classroom, some of it would be field days, some of it would be a combination of the two. And I don't know, the soil conservationist, I think about 8 years into my career in Pierce County, he was older and he was going to retire, and and of course I even kept the coffee cup at his office because I was there a lot, hung out a lot. And even though he was a soil conservationist, he was really into forestry. He was basically a forester, even though he didn't study it in college. But he we're standing there, and he had all these, as an SCS office would have, these rows of green file cabinets in his cubicle, and they're full of plans. And I turned and looked at him, and his name is Max Fulner, and I said, Max, you've prepared all these plans for these forest landowners, because that's what he was doing in part. I said, what do you know about what's happened? Did any of them implement their plans? And it was partly because he was retiring too, and we were close friends, but he kind of got, I'm not saying he didn't cry, but he got a little soft spoken, as I can too. And, he kind of, because I was asking a question that was about, what did he accomplish in his career? I didn't mean to pose it in that way, but I think he took it that way.
Right.
And he was honestly saddened by the fact that he had done all this work, and probably a lot of it really didn't result in anything unless it involved a cost share. But as far as helping to transfer knowledge, educate people, because we were all working together, the DNR and SCS, or now NRCS. We were all, hand in hand on this thing. And that was a moment. That was a turning point for me in terms of how I viewed what we were doing.
Arno, it's interesting that you've brought up this idea of plans and what does that result in. Just yesterday, I was looking at statistics from the coach planning courses that I've done. And for folks listening, we're going to get into more detail about coach planning and what that is. But I noticed that we had a 34% plan completion rate within the first year after taking the course. But we had well over 80% of new stewardship practices implemented. And we've done some prior studies that found there was no statistically significant difference in terms of whether or not people implement new practices on the ground, whether they've done a plan or not coming out of the education program. And so that kind of begs the question of, are stewardship plans the right metric in terms of what we want to see? That seems to be what the public agencies and the federal agencies want. They want to count the widget. But is that really a good indicator of our impact through extension forestry?
Oh, I'm not surprised at all, Kevin, with what you're revealing, what you're finding. I think I think you're right on. We did don't want to get into it, but some of the evaluations that I did early on was um, where where plans had been prepared for people by a consultant or NRCS or the DNR or anybody. The family forest landowner didn't necessarily even know where the plan was, let alone what was in it. Um, so I think what you're describing is the exercise. That's the value of coach planning, and that is that they're, whether they're taking it through your media platform or doing it face to face, they're actually sitting in their seats, so to speak, um, hearing all these presenters or presentations or from coaches. That's where the word coach came from. And it, after a while, it starts to sink in. It really does sink in that, oh, okay. Um, and that's as opposed to someone who simply has a plan prepared for them. And especially for a family forest landowner, how much ownership do they have in it? And I think the three of us can agree that when they've participated in the learning experience, more so than just even the plan and the production of a plan, they have ownership in it, and that's what I think that's what your evaluation or analysis has revealed.
Yeah, and just to give a little background to any listeners that aren't familiar, forest stewardship coach planning is, well, we like to call it the sort of flagship course for WCU Extension Forestry. And as Arno's describing, it's multiple weeks of learning from experts on these different elements of forest management that all happen to coincide with the development of a forest stewardship plan. So you literally write a plan as you're going through the course, learning from experts, getting a site visit. There's a field trip too, so it's very immersive. And it sounds to me, Arno, like you're saying that the impetus, because we haven't mentioned this, but Arno created this class. He's the creator of coach planning, and the impetus of that was that exact idea, that just handing a landowner a plan and saying, okay, here's what you should probably do with your property, just it doesn't really get it done if people aren't out there developing it and creating this sort of living document, really, is what a plan is anyway, themselves.
Yes, there were And when the idea came developed, and I need to share that with you because this will be the record of how it happened. A lot of people. Well, I don't know how. Well, when I was in those early days of my career in Pierce and King County, um, there was, and I don't know that it's changed a whole lot, but because of federal funding, we were, there was a lot of pressure, a lot of interest in more new audiences and diverse audiences. And so when I would have my annual review, that would be a topic of discussion, and as it would have been for any faculty member at the time in the 80s and the 90s, and probably still is today. But what I was observing in my former my NRCS friend and others, basically we had a following. Anytime we wanted to do a tour or a one-off class or something like that, the same people would show up, maybe a few new people. And so of course, I was thinking, well, how do we get new audiences? That was kind of in the back of my head too. So and I'm going to kind of get into it, guys. But what inspired me was a change in the 1990 Farm Bill. It goes back a ways, and what they did is the 1990 Farm Bill basically the phrase forest stewardship program was in the legislation. I don't know how it got there, why it got there, and to me it was a kind of a huge change in the direction for extension forestry since it was created in the 30s, and I forget the year, but it wasn't with it was something that was added later. It's all agricultural educational programming and technology transfer, and then they wanted to address all these private forest landowners. But what I liked about that when I read up on it a little bit was uh, uh, forest stewardship. That's an action phrase, and um, and we want our landowners to be forest stewards. That's how I saw it when I interpreted it. Now you can read, I found a paper, an abstract on, kind of chronicling the history of it because I needed to have my time frame straight. But they wanted us at that time to, you know, this new program is going to, get more plans written and enhance the productivity of timber, fish, and wildlife, and um, protect our forests from damage caused by fire, insects, disease, and the weather. All these things. But I just like the phrase. It reinvigorated me. Okay, so what did I do with that? And I can't tell you how I found out about it, but I think all three of us are a little bit familiar with the state of Montana. Well, it's a big state, and they didn't have the only extension forester they had was a specialist. And the at this time, the extension specialist was a guy by the name of Bob Logan, who had been a county extension forester in Oregon, I forget where, and he came up with a program, uh, basically a forest stewardship program, and his biggest challenge was is that because it's a big state and people and it's not a I forget what their population is now, but it's maybe north of 1 million people or so, um, when the tourists aren't there. But the idea was, how do I deliver an extension program? And so what he did is he recruited and I guess oriented or trained some consultants, and they delivered uh, the forest stewardship workshops, as they were referred to, at various geographical locations around the state where they could get the ranchers and forest landowners to attend. And the concept was that they would, with the help of that consultant, they would write their own forest stewardship plan. Well, gosh, my goodness, that was like wow. So I got I probably got on the phone, but I know I probably raced up to UW to visit with Don Hanley about it, and we sat there, and well, the DNR is going to be involved with this because they're getting state and federal funding, and so then in the South Puget Sound regional office, the person who had just gained the position for forest stewardship for the region was I'm thinking my name, Don Theo. And so then we all got together and we came up with the basic program as it was for years and years and years. And we started doing coach planning, 8 or 9 classes, a field visit or a field day on a Saturday, and then of course the DNR took a lead on doing site visits. I sometimes went along as well. And first we did 1, and then we did 2, and then we did, and I'm talking about per year. And then I think we were up to 4 or 5 a year. I think that was where we maxed out, and then we realized it was too much. It takes up a lot of weekends and evenings to do that. You don't have a life, but that's basically how it was created. So I borrowed an idea and modified it from Montana State University, and we brought together a team, and we did involve consultants in the beginning. I think it sort of fell off a little bit, um, because, and there was a lot of controversy about what this thing that Washington State was doing. I heard, I didn't travel to DC and talk to anybody in USDA, but there were some questions in I think what was it, the National Association of Consulting Foresters. They had some questions about it too, because what are we doing? Are we taking business away from them? But I always argued that um, that uh, the people we were typically meeting didn't necessarily. They were probably the least likely forest landowners to ever hire a consultant. And if they did, it would be when they were going to do a harvest, and that's of course a very critical time to involve a consultant to get a good logging contractor and to get the most money for the wood or the timber sale if you're going to sell a stumpage sale. So that's kind of how it all came together, and then it was like a floodgate. We quickly went through in Pierce County. Quickly went through all the people that we would expect, who are following, and we figured, well, maybe it'll taper off. Well, it didn't. Every time we advertised forest stewardship coach planning, we'd get a whole new cohort of people we'd never met before. So now, going back to my comment about new audiences, we were getting new audiences where we never, I would have to say we never had them before. At least I wasn't very successful at really garnering totally new audiences. And yes, some more diverse audiences as far as the things that we strive to do. And it really, and I would argue, and I hope it's true to say this, Kevin and Patrick, to this very day, it really hasn't changed a whole lot.
I don't think it has changed all that much because what you're describing is very much my experience, and I'm guessing Patrick's experience as well. All of my coach planning classes sell out, and sometimes very quickly. And we've had in the past
Yeah,
couple of years where the waiting list from one class is enough to fill the next class. So it continues to be very popular.
right.
And one of the things that I observe is this, what you're just mentioning, is the diversity of people who are taking the course. We get people with 1,000 acres, we get people with a quarter acre, and they all come out of the course saying
Mhm.
that that was really useful for me. We get people who just bought their forest land. In fact, we get kind of a bimodal distribution of people who just bought their forest land in the last year versus people who've had their forest land for 20 years or more. And both groups seem to benefit considerably. What I hear from the people who've had their forest land for a long time consistently is I didn't know what I didn't know, and I wish I'd taken this 20 years ago.
Hmm.
Right.
When you were starting out with Coach Plan, did you see this same diversity in terms of ownership size and length of tenure of ownership?
Um, well, there's always been, uh, in terms of size, yes, some large landowners and, you know, and definitely small, under 5 acres, because part of it was people, I guess I like to, I like to think that the phrase of forest stewardship, resonates with people and they go, what is this? And it sounds interesting. And they're drawn to it. And I think over the course of my career delivering that program, because I always had you know, people would show up that hadn't registered because we did, I did charge a fee because we had a lot of materials and stuff. And I told people, they weren't too sure. And I said, um, well, just sit through the first class and make a decision. And over the course of my, uh, like a decade of delivering it, even though I tapered off a bit at the end, I only had one person that said, no, I'm not really, that's not what I thought it was. But most people that, came in and took a spot, um, unbeknownst to me, or they identified themselves. They would go, "This is exactly what I want," So I can only think of one. I can remember it. One individual that said, "No, this isn't at all what I wanted. It's not what I expected," and that's telling too, because um, uh, there's just something about it, and quite honestly, I'm going back to, I guess, a comment about my career. This really rejuvenated me in terms of my work. You know, I'd lost some passion about doing the topical rotation back in the late '70s and '80s. Where you just, oh, we haven't done this topic for a while. Let's do a thinning workshop. Let's do in a field day, and stuff like that. And but this was different. This was exciting. I felt well. There were several issues, and it was even a discussion on campus. Well, would landowners want to, when in the very beginning, would they want to take uh, an 8-week course, consecutive Thursdays or whatever, would they stand for that? Well, a lot of we always talk about our family forest landowners as an aging population. Well, I mean, look at the Master Gardener program. So I'm going to borrow from that, and I did. The idea is they want to learn. They're adults, especially maybe when they're retired or have more time. They do want to learn, and of course, if they are retired, they're thinking about legacy. They want to pass it along to their children or grandchildren or their niece if they don't have any other heirs. And that's what inspired the whole idea that you basically pay, one registration for your family. Whether you do that or not anymore is unimportant. But the idea is we wanted them all there. You didn't want to be just, quite honestly, the patriarch of the family taking the course. The, the husband and wife need to be there. Their children should be there if they're interested. So I was trying to approach this from really as an educational program. Going back to your question about, or statement about how important are the plans. Yeah, plans and plan completion's a great metric, but really that's really not what it's about. It never really was. And for the DNR, not to be critical of them, that's what they want to count. That's what they want to report to state and USDA. But really, we were always pushed as extension educators. I remember Linda Fox. She would always ask that question, our former director of extension. So what, Arno? So what? You had all these programs. And I think, quite honestly, Patrick and Kevin, you've gotten particularly good at answering the so what question.
Yeah, I remember when I first started, Linda Kirk Fox drilling that into us new faculty. It's all about impacts, impacts,
That's right.
impacts.
And what are your indicators? Plan completion it's just as using the old logic model thing. It's just an output, having the classes. Okay. But what you're doing, Kevin, what we are all doing really changes people. It changes how they think, how they view their forest. Just to learn the different trees is absolutely amazing to some people. They don't know one tree from the other. And I know we're probably, because it's me, I can talk a lot, but we've been on together for an hour here, but I actually, in terms of my current um, work here, I'm training forest stewards to be for the park system now, and we're doing a 4-day curriculum. They're not doing a plan, but they help with the plan and help with planning. So I've actually implemented a version of a coach planning in my current uh, job, and like we were going to start in March of 2020, and we did, and then COVID hit, so we didn't get back to it until last year. But I've got I don't know. I think there were 27 in the class. Some of them were already forest stewards because there were people that I've been working with for years who are retired volunteers. But we had, well, I don't know, probably 18, 17, 18 of them have actually worked in the field with me and some other members of my group, Natural Resources group, and working on things related to the forest stewardship plan implementation of various things. So
Well, Arno, this is a great segue to talking a little bit more about your current position. So it sounds like about 10 years ago, you transitioned from WSU to Kitsap County. And one of the things that I think you were involved with just a few years ago was working with a park in South Kitsap County. And the reason I bring this up is because over the past 15 years, what you dealt with there at the park in Kitsap County has become a huge issue for local, state, and now even our national parks in Washington. And
mhm.
that is forest disease, specifically laminated root rot, seems to be the most common issue in some of these older stands. And it's happening around high use recreation areas like campgrounds. And it puts park managers in a very difficult situation if you go in there and do what we know we can do to mitigate the disease silviculturally. Well, that's going to involve removing some trees, and the public gets very upset. If you leave it alone, someone's going to get seriously injured or even killed. And of course, that's not acceptable. And then what a lot of parks are just defaulting to then is closing off campgrounds and recreation areas. And we've seen
Mhm.
that at several state parks. We've seen that in local parks, and it's even going on right now at Mount Rainier National Park. But you took a much more proactive approach in Kitsap County to address this in an area that was very visible to the public. So, can you tell us about that? What you did, why you did it, and then what were the outcomes of that?
Well, there were a couple of Kevin, a couple of instances where um, I can even remember when because I was in Pearson King, and then the last I ended my career in Kitsap County. That's actually how I ended up working here. Um, and they've had some problems in several of their parks. And I remember getting together with a risk manager, and they would drive me out and show me this park. And South Kitsap is one of them, where you're describing the specific one. But there was another one, a smaller one, and they had hired consultants, and the consultants made recommendations, and they even brought in a DNR forester, and they had the same recommendation. And I just turned to the risk manager and I said, "Well, why haven't you done anything? You should be showing me maybe what's been done rather than the same problem." In other words, in one of the parks, a part of a dead tree actually killed someone, and left the park, and killed someone outside the park. And I'm looking at him going, "Why haven't you done anything about this?" But it's sort of this paralysis kind of thing where you know they they're concerned about just public sentiment in general. I mean, a dead standing tree is habitat. Um, it has and when they fall, and then if it's a big tree, it can be really useful habitat as large woody debris. But the idea is there are places, just like you described, where it's a hazard tree. Even if it's, quite honestly, even if it's alive, it might be infected, say, with root rot. It's just we can't really tell for sure because it's maybe bordering an area where there's a root rot center or area. And and I could, there's still examples of that in the park system in this county. But so one of the benefits of just thinning in general is to enhance the vigor of those trees that remain. And the thinning that I'm doing is more selective, in that we want uh, more diversity in our parks. So uh, uh, we try to we're not harvesting species that are more minor in trying to, usually it's where we have more fir, Douglas fir, than anything else. So that's the target species. And laminated root rot is pretty both Douglas fir and hemlock are pretty susceptible to that. So, but one of the things to uh, kind of resist it is for the tree to have the most space it can have, and you want to enhance the vigor of that tree so they can thwart off an attack and from insects and disease. And but if it's a park, you don't log in a park, and so it's that makes an overstocked public park more vulnerable to disease and insect and fire, for that matter, really. Um, so, and they finally, actually, when I did the thinning in the park, the larger park, the 200-acre park, it was like they were really worried, and they I hadn't planned to do it because there was this kind of this reluctance to do anything, and I understand it. I'm not. It sounds like I'm being critical, but it had plenty of people and tell them what needed to be done, and they still didn't do it. And they finally decided, let's do it. And so in 2017, we went. The contractor that I work with went in there, and we did a thinning in that park. And of course you can't, we don't have X-ray vision, so we can't see that every tree we left is healthy or not. We did do some things to try and determine how big an area we needed clear so that the trees that were left were are at least less likely to be infected with root rot. And based on the years since then and observations, we've had some trees that have died, some that have blown over, but it's been minimal compared to the past.
Well, Arno, I always like to end. We are going to have to wrap up soon, unfortunately. But I like to end with a sort of call to action to some degree. It's certainly one of those would be to follow forestry.wsu.edu for a coach planning course. By the time this comes out, our winter sessions will be started and fully booked. But I know there's some classes in the spring, and there will be some more in the fall. But I wonder too if there are any parks that you could mention specifically, maybe where people could go and see some of that work that you've done.
Yeah, um, during my first year was just getting things set up, so I've got 9 years of thinning
Mm-hmm.
that we've done, and we do have some rather large parks. There's one in the south end of the county, uh, so it's closer to Tacoma. That's called Coulter Creek, and part of that park is also connected to an old former state park that became part of the park. It's called Square Lake. That's the one I would focus on. Good access, really great access, and you can see a lot there. It's just west of Highway 16 on the off Sedgwick, but anybody could Google it, because it's still there is a lake, a square lake. It's a beautiful lake, and that one I'm quite pleased with. And then there's a park just west of Silverdale called Newberry Hill Heritage Park, and it very very good access. I'm thinking about access too, and it's off Newberry Hill Road, and very easy to find. That's where I probably have done, I don't know, over 500 acres there of the thinning. I didn't do it, obviously, the contractor did, but um, and one of the things I guess I would like to say about these 10 years and working with coach planning as I did, if I knew then what I know today, having been an actual field forester in a sense, because what I've been doing is kind of a staff of one, and I usually have a summer intern. Um, I would say I would have a lot more to offer in terms of advice to a landowner that has 20 acres or 40 acres or even 5 acres, because I spent my whole career as an educator, and I did a little bit of field forestry in the very beginning, but and quite honestly, when it comes to ecological forestry, I think it suits family forest landowner very well. I think my belief is a lot of the family forest landowners really aren't interested in doing big clear cuts or anything like that. And I was always so disappointed when they wouldn't even do any thinning. But what I'm saying is I didn't know what I know today to really tell that story and how they could do it and what it could mean and what the real benefits would be, and potentially even economic returns, even though that may not be what would drive them to do it. But you can have a better and more healthy forest, really, and better wildlife habitat. All the things that, every time I did the goal thing at the coach planning, that,
Mm-hmm.
when I was doing those, and Patrick, you remember it, and Kevin too, probably, timber production or cutting trees for lumber was, not usually the number one thing that they were after, as a forest landowner. And I don't know, maybe that's changed some, but probably not. But I think I could do a better job of talking people into doing something today than I did 20 years ago. That's my point.
Yeah, that's funny, and I can, I guess, commiserate a little bit with that. Just in the last year or so, having taken over as managing one of the properties for WSU here and doing a lot of restoration work on the ground. I mean, we're not really doing any harvesting or anything like that, but a lot of work that I think landowners would be doing, especially that noxious weed removal and
Oh yeah,
just hammering away at the woods and just sweating in the woods. And it's not that I would teach anything differently necessarily now, but it certainly draws that connection, and you start to understand all
yeah,
the hours that go into it, and why someone wouldn't do it, frankly. And
sure,
I get that
yeah,
completely.
yeah. The noxious weeds are, you get more Scotch broom, and you know the stuff that's already there tends to flourish for a while when you do a thinning, because you got more sunlight hitting the ground, and you open the roads up and stuff like that. So that's the really only, and a lot of people aren't happy with that, but of course they think it happens because of the thinning. It does, but the seed was already there in terms of Scotch broom, and if the ivy was already there, it was already there. Of course, ivy doesn't need sunlight, and the blackberries were already there, but but now they have more sunlight, that kind of thing. So this has
Well,
been great fun.
yeah,
Thank you.
and I really enjoyed this. I'm so glad we were able to get you on, Kevin. I'm really glad that you were able to join as well. Do you have any final thoughts, words?
I do not, other than to thank our guest, Arno. It's been great to have you on, and I'm really glad we're able to capture some of the history of what continues to be our flagship program, and to
Hmm.
learn a little bit more about how your career and how WSU Extension Forestry evolved over the last few decades.
And what I wanted to say to you, Kevin, was and Patrick, but Kevin, I is remember I was one of your advisors, career guidance people, and all that. But I'm very proud of what you've achieved with and elevated the forest stewardship coach planning program. I think you've given it, you know, uh, you've made it really, uh, 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 I don't want to say better, you made it really more accessible to everybody. I have met countless people in, uh, in my job with, with parks that, uh, they talk about you. They've taken your class face to face or, online. And that's, so you know, I may have started it, but you guys are taking it to a whole nother level, and that's that makes me feel really, really good. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Arno. That's really great for us to hear.
Hmm. All right. Well, thank you all, Forest Overstory diehards. I appreciate you all tuning in for these episodes, and please feel free to share the word with your friends so more people can listen. And we're gonna have a lot more great guests in the coming months, and I'm hoping Kevin will be here to join me too. It's been a really great episode, so I want to thank Arno again for coming along. And as always, we will see you next month.